My name is Craig Lonergan, and I live in Ticonderoga, and I know something about the history of the pencil industry and its association with Ticonderoga. My grandfather worked in the mines at Graphite, New York, which was supposed to have been named Dixon, New York, but they ended up calling it Graphite. And he was recruited, he wasn't recruited in New York, but his father was an immigrant from Ireland. And he came into Ellis Island back in during the potato famine. And in those days, a representative from the mines here, either in Graphite or in Ironville, other places in the Adirondack, or in some of the mills, they sent recruiters down to Ellis Island to get immigrants. So they gave them passage on the train north, and they usually recruited maybe 25 or so, and they supplied them with work shoes and clothes and that kind of thing, and gave them a job in the mine, put them up in the rooming house. The only catch was they had to register Republican. But they recruited them, and they came from Poland, Germany, Italy, Ireland, all those places. And when they came here, they carried on the same European attitudes that they had in wars and that kind of thing. So in the town of Graphite, they had to separate them from each other sometimes. And they didn't speak English. And my grandfather originally was hired as a horse handler when he was maybe 14. And then later on he became the bookkeeper, because he knew how to read and write, and he could sign for the immigrants their checks. One of the interesting rooming house stories was that there was a guy that kept telling people that he had bugs, and he kept telling them, and they kept staying away from him, and they wouldn't even go in his room. And in those days, the people that lived in the rooming house, it was so crowded that in different shifts of the mines, when you came back from your shift, you crawled into bed. And the guy who was in the bed before you has gone to work. So they do the same thing in the Navy and certain ships.
Submarines.
Submarines, they do it that way, but that's what they did then, and he had spread the word around so nobody would sleep. And in those days, my grandfather was the bookkeeper up into the 20s, and he knew that the mine was going to close, so he left and became a bookkeeper in the Ticonderoga paper mill. And part of the reason was that it was early outsourcing. One of the probably first examples in our economy that in Sri Lanka they gave away graphite, and they could use it for ballast on boats, and then they'd unload it and it was free. So that's one of the precipitating factors for the decline of the graphite industry. In those days, there were maybe 1,500 people living in Graphite. There were 5 bars and no church.
That's Irish.
And my grandfather, being Irish, thought that they should have a church, and they should also have a meeting house. So he got the miners together, and they constructed the Echo Mountain Hall. And in the Echo Mountain Hall, they had square dances on Saturday night, and a lot of drinking and hooping and hollering and all that stuff. Then Sunday morning, my grandfather would go over and sweep up the empty bottles and peanut shells and all that, and then they would have church. In those days, there was no unemployment insurance, no insurance for getting injured on the job and that kind of thing. So the people took care of themselves. There was a blind guy that worked in the mines that had become blind as a mine accident. So they continued having him work there. He was pretty good because he could work in the dark. And but he used to cling on to the ore carts coming out of the mill, and there were other people like that that just had no other alternative, and the people used to take care of them themselves, so they just didn't let them starve. You know. Although they were known in the winter they had ice in the mines, and in the summertime, people would go up there as a kind of a tourist destination.
But the hotels would send crews up there to harvest the ice.
Really?
And one time, my grandfather, they asked him to show the people the ice mines, and he went up there and he got lost. So they always kidded about that he didn't know where he was going. I can remember as a kid, we used to live up on top of Mount Hope, and we used to ride our bicycles down there, and the graphite mine, or the lead mill we called it, was right there. And we would try to ride our sleds to get there long enough that we could pull right into the lead mill parking lot. Or on our bikes we could ride right into there, and you could ride right down the back of the lead mill and go across this bridge and be right in the middle of the paper mill. And in those days, when we were little kids, you could walk around in the mill, and whether it was the lead mill or the paper mill. It was common practice that if your father worked on a paper machine and he forgot his lunch, the mother would pack up a lunch and give it to the kid to take to your father, and these little kids would come right into the middle of the mill, and all kinds of machinery going on and whatever, and give your father the lunch. And we used to hang out on the loading dock. A friend of mine's father worked in the mill, and we'd go down and listen to their stories or whatever, and we'd build hideouts in the mill, in the skids. The kids that lived over on Cassie Street where the wood yard was would build hideouts out of logs, in big log piles, and the cranes would be going around picking up logs, and meanwhile kids are playing in the mill. Across the street was a big rooming house, like 4 stories high, I think, made of wood, that they call that the lead mill block, and friends of mine lived there. And that house also was gray like the lead mill. Everything in the lead mill was black.
Right.
And we always remember, even the truck would be all black, and the graphite was all over everything, you know, all over the workers. Their clothes were all black, their faces were black until they opened their eyes or smiled, and you could see their teeth or, you know, their eyes. But they were, it was quite a thing, you know, that to see. And I always wondered what it was like when they went home to take a bath, because I used to work in the lower mill, which is right across the river, and you know, we could shower and stuff afterwards, but I can't ever recall that they had a shower room in the lead mill, but they might have. But it was a typical dangerous thing. They had big dollies, and the lead was in big drums, or the graphite refined, and they would move that around, and they had a freight station which was right in town. And that's where they would take the lead there and load it on. to
But the
the
graphite
trains.
went down through Hagen at the Hague dock, right?
Yeah, they brought it down from Graphite to Lake George and then loaded it on rafts and brought it into Ticonderoga and then brought it down to the lead mill. The mill was where it is because of water power. There's a pond in just over the hill from Graphite, that Lost Pond, I don't know if it's called Lost.
North Pond.
North Pond, the one that Rosses used to live on. They created that little pond to filter the water from the processing in the mine so that wouldn't flow into Lake George.
Okay.
But today, there probably could not be a revival of any of that because of Lake George. And
Yeah.